October 24th, 1944. Morning comes on in pale bands, a slow burn over the Sibuyan Sea, the water a restless sheet of pewter under low haze and small, impatient swells. On the flight decks to the east, men move with practiced economy, chocks, fuel lines, bomb carts, the taste of avgas in the back of the throat, while the ship's loudspeakers crackle with clipped voices and the metallic clatter of tools. There is a feeling you can't shake. Today will not be ordinary. If you're new here and want more history told from the human angle, take a second to subscribe to Warpath. Let's walk into this one together. The map looks simple until you feel the weight of it. To the west, Admiral Kurita's center force, battleships and cruisers hardened for a decisive punch, has pushed through the Palawan Passage and is angling across the Sibuyan Sea toward the San Bernardino Strait. Slip that choke point by nightfall, and the next morning they can fall on the invasion fleet off Leyte. Far to the north, Admiral Ozawa's northern force is waving a bright, deliberate flag, carriers used as bait to pull the American fast carriers out of position. And out here, east of the Philippines, Task Force 38 rides the swells in long steel lines, the big decks and light carriers that can put steel wings over anything in reach. Everyone knows the geometry. The question is, whose timing will snap shut first? Yesterday tore a hole in Kurita's confidence even if the column kept moving. In the narrow water off Palawan, American submarines lay in wait. Torpedoes found Kurita's flagship and a heavy cruiser in a blur of wakes and black water. Another cruiser staggered, bleeding, and had to turn back. Kurita scrambled to a new bridge, voices raised, papers collected in hands that weren't sure what to hold first. He kept going, because the plan demanded it, because pride demanded it, but the staff around him now spoke in lower tones, each order shadowed by the awareness that the ocean had already taken a bite. The carriers wake to weather that pilots will call workable, light haze on the horizon, patches of high cloud, sea state moderate enough to launch, but bumpy enough to keep stomachs honest. Just after sunrise, spotters start their routine, eyes to the west, binoculars on strings, radios checking in, the drone of search planes growing faint across the water. The morning recon pattern runs out like threads, scouts from Essex and her sisters fanning ahead, others from the light carriers sliding farther around the arc. The first hints come back as smudges and estimates, then get refined. Columns on the move in the Sibuyan, smoke stacked low, escorts keeping station. By mid-morning, call it around 9 local, you can hear the confidence in the reporting. The center force is there, big silhouettes, multiple masts, the kind of wakes that don't belong to freighters. On a flag bridge out at sea, a senior officer taps a pencil and murmurs the words everyone wants to hear. Found. It's not just information, it's permission. On the flight decks, crews swap out training talk for the ritual of getting real. Bombs fitted, fuses set, torpedoes nursed on dollies, drag rings checked. The men rolling them under the Avengers have their own silent math. Late 44, the Mark 13s have a better record when handled right, and today there will be no excuses. Outboard, Helldivers get their own attention. Nose panels latched, canopies slid, a quick glance at the slant of the sun to guess shadow and glare. F6Fs tighten their guns and think about flak, how it blooms like dirty cotton where you least want to fly. Word filters across the ships about what exactly sits in that western smudge. A Yamato-class hull, the kind of tonnage the enemy built for myth as much as for gunnery, moving with a pride that dares you to knock it flat. Musashi. The name has a sound to it, dense, heavy, the promise of punishment. The logic of the fight starts to harden. You don't bruise a ship like that. You work it until the systems that keep it upright and moving are too busy saving themselves to fight you back. You pin the bridge with plunging bombs so men keep their heads down, and you press torpedoes from both beams, so the counter-flooding that saves one side punishes the other. You steal speed, then you steal control. A battleship dies the way a mountain sinks, slowly at first, then all at once. In the ready rooms, the air feels too thin. A pilot scribbles the torpedo release numbers on a thumbnail, even though he's memorized them since training. Someone else rubs a rabbit's foot they swear is for the ship, not for themselves. A crew chief whispers to his Avengers turret gunner about staying talkative on the run-in, not because there's anything new to say, but because silence can break you. The ordnance man shoves one last pin into a bomb tail and gives the cart a tap like he's tucking in a child. There is noise everywhere, compressors, wind, the thud of boots, but inside, each man the quiet grows. On the Japanese side, the morning builds in beats that feel rehearsed, but never ordinary. Kurita's lookouts count aircraft specs that don't quite resolve, then vanish in the glare. The bridge writes time checks in pencil, because ink smears if the ship shudders. Somewhere deep in a battleship, a petty officer checks the flood valves and thinks about how water moves where it wants to, and how their job is to make it choose the places that won't kill them. Orders move by voice and by chalk. A signalman squints toward the east and shapes a hand against the light. The American radio picture thickens. Multiple large targets, escorts, course lines bending east-west and back again as the enemy threads the sea between islands. The staff plots, erases, and replots with each report. The decision settles on the room like a change in weather. Launch, engines turn, cough, and catch. The first deck crews motion, with flat palms and bent knees, guiding aircraft into position with the kind of grace you only see from men who work inches from spinning metal. On the island, a voice calls the wind, the deck officer's hands carving commands out of air. Pilots cinch belts, scratch at the sudden itch of nerves, and stare down the sliver of deck ahead like a promise they intend to keep. The carriers come around to put their bows into the breeze. The squadrons roll, one by one, toward the catwalk edge, and the horizon shrinks to the thin line where the haze isn't quite thick enough to hide what's waiting. The first strike runs come together in a rush of moving parts that feel choreographed, only because thousands of repetitions have taught men how to compress fear into muscle memory. From Essex and Lexington, from Intrepid and Franklin, from Enterprise and the light decks riding shotgun, the packages build out. Hellcats to clear and herd, Helldivers to pin the big ships, Avengers to drag their torpedoes in from the waterline's blind spots. Radios are clipped and spare. The map is already in everyone's head. West, low haze. A long gray column threading between islands like a spine. Around mid-morning, call it roughly 10 to half past, cloud breaks offer lanes. The first Helldivers roll in from 15,000, canopies hot with sun glare, dive brakes biting the air. The anti-aircraft bursts thicken almost immediately. Black and white puffs stepping up the sky in stacks. Then the finer hail of tracers that feel personal, as if someone is writing your name in orange fire. The instinct is to flinch. The discipline is to hold the angle. Watch the ship swell in the glass until the silhouette fills your world and the centerline seam on the deck is all you can see. Bombs stride down in 2s and 4s. Near misses climb the hull in pillars of water that slam the plating like a fist. A hit on the superstructure stuns men at their stations. Another finds deck plating forward, blows out fittings, and turns air into shrapnel. Avengers are already pressing in, spread wide, some trusting the late war rigging that lets the Mark 13 survive a hotter, higher drop. Others still easing down to a few hundred feet, because that's how instinct says you keep a torpedo honest. They sort themselves, a beam attack from port, another from starboard, because the point is not just to hit, it's to force a choice the big ship can't win. Plumes lift along the flanks as torpedoes bite or pass close. One wakes under the bow and runs out harmless. Another tracks true, and the water rears against armor like a living thing. On Musashi, the shock of those first passes is physical. Lights flicker, voices bounce off steel, rangefinders lose their line for a beat. The ship answers with everything she has. The big dual-purpose mounts hurl shells that burrow into the sky and burst. The 25mm crews empty magazines so fast the barrels smoke and the hot casings roll underfoot. Destroyers throw smoke that hangs in ragged veils. The column bends, then straightens, then bends again as helmsmen try to comb out torpedo tracks without stacking ships into each other. A hit down low tumbles through compartments and the list ticks over a hair to port, not enough to alarm a landsman, but enough for the petty officers and damage control to feel it in their knees. Counter-flood starboard, comes the order, and the water is sworn into the fight like a conscript, controlled, measured, a necessary sin to keep the deck flat enough to work the guns. The strike climbs away and reforms in ragged echelons, the ocean below stippled by bomb splashes and the wakes of weapons that missed. Behind them, the first measurement of effect is simple. Musashi has lost a slice of speed. Not gone, but shaved. From the low 20s down toward the high teens, the number itself less important than the trend. A crippled giant is still a giant. An increasingly slow one becomes a target the sky can find, again and again. The second wave comes on before the nerves can settle, late morning pressing toward midday. And the flat gunners are already sore in the shoulders, already half deaf, but they feed belts and work sights and scream corrections across the din. Helldivers dive steeper this time, on cues from the first run. Aim to pin the bridge and forward fire control, so no one can calmly keep the picture. Bombs walk along the spine, and the near misses do their own terrible arithmetic, bending plates and cracking seams, pouring spray into vents that were never meant to drink salt water. An Avenger rides the troughs in, lifts over a smear of smoke, and drops in a lane that looks impossibly narrow until it isn't. The spread is better now. The pilots have tasted how the ship turns under pressure, and they choose their releases like they have been practicing on this hull for months. Down below, the damage reports stack up with the rhythm of a drum beat, flooding forward of midships, pumps online, then stumbling, then finding their cadence again. List steady at a few degrees, an improvement that feels like victory until a pair of hits to the opposite side forces another round of calculations. Counter flood back. Watch the bubble. Keep the deck as level as pride can stand. The price of staying upright is drag. The price of drag is speed. The price of speed is that the first wave can talk, the second wave right onto you. Farther down the line, Yamato takes something near and ugly enough to spray her decks, and a heavy cruiser rides out a bomb shock that jams a turret and leaves men staring at gear that suddenly feels older than it did an hour ago. But the attention keeps swinging back to Musashi because she's both the biggest threat and the best lever. Hurt her, and you change the day for everyone. The American packages back out toward the carriers in long arcs, and the pilots who can't stop shaking their hands clamp them under their thighs and grind their teeth until the nerves lie down. Over the water, you can see the footprints of the fight, smoke columns, smeared wakes, oil tracing thin black lines on a sea the color of beaten tin. In the air, the next group is already cutting across, their radios terse, their checklists a litany. On the decks to the east, ordnance crews move again with that same compressed economy, sliding fresh bombs, rolling fresh torpedoes, and glancing up only long enough to register that the haze has brightened and the wind has freshened a touch. On Musashi's bridge, the commander's world has narrowed to 2 dials and a handful of reports. Speed is not what it was. Steering answers, then lags, then answers again, with a sluggishness that invites ugly metaphors men swallow before they can say them out loud. The counter-flooding did its work, but the ship now carries water she didn't wake with, and every degree of list corrected with ballast is a decision that will be remembered if the night brings rougher seas. Out on the wings, lookouts track specks that pass and specks that turn, trying to guess which ones return with malice and which are just lost. For a time after noon, the column's shape looks less like an arrow and more like a question mark. Kurita has a choice most men would prefer to make on a quiet day with a map in front of them. He makes it in smoke and heat, with the sense that more is coming. Somewhere to the east, the next wave is forming, and to the north, unseen but not unfelt, a different temptation is calling American attention away. The sea holds its breath, the carriers heel into the wind, and the giant in the middle of it all moves a little more slowly than she did an hour ago. The pressure builds in layers until it starts to bend decisions. Just past midday, with the second wave's footprints still churning the Sibuyan into a quilt of wakes and oil, Kurita throws his column into a broad turn that points it away from San Bernardino. On American plots, it looks like a retreat made plain. To men staring at thin pencil lines on tracing paper, the picture hardens. The center force is backing off. The sea can make liars of moments like this, but in that hour the impression feels real enough to build on. Aboard the carriers, no one slows because of a line on a map. Flight decks are assembly lines with the clock in charge. Crews pull warm bomb racks by feel, swap fuses with blackened fingers, wrestle fresh Mark 13s under the bellies of Avengers, check the shrouds and drag rings one more time. Refuelers snake hoses through a forest of landing gear. Plane captains run hands along cowlings that still tick with heat. Pilots step around puddles of fuel and try not to think about what a spark would do. The tempo holds because a rhythm this violent either keeps going or falls apart, and no one intends to be the generation that lets the day collapse. To the west, Kurita steadies on that away heading, long enough for word to radiate outward. On a flag bridge, a staffer leans over the chart and says it out loud so the room can hear it. He's going the other way. The inference travels just as quickly. If the center force is breaking contact, the northern decoy may be the greater threat. You can feel the pull in the way the talk shifts, in the hard stares over the chart's top edge toward a horizon no one in this room can see. But the air groups still have a job here, and the sea is not finished with either side. Late in the morning, far from the Musashi smoke columns, a single land-based bomber from Luzon slips through the edges of the combat air patrol and plants a bomb into the light carrier Princeton. It is the kind of hit that feels small at first, a hard stamp on deck that blasts men off their feet and knocks tools out of hands. Fire does the rest. Flames run under plating where air wants to go anyway. Heat climbs. The ship's crew fights it like they have rehearsed, hoses searching for the seat, foam clawing at the orange. The wind that helps big decks launch also feeds a blaze that learns too quickly and refuses to forget. Hours pass while smoke rips off her like a storm cloud, and rescue ships come alongside to share hoses and pull men who jump. On Princeton's hangar deck, the fire finds what fires always find if given time. Deep in the ship, a magazine cooks toward the edge of what steel can contain. When it goes in mid-afternoon, the shock walks across water and pounds into the light cruiser, Birmingham, tight alongside to help. In an instant, the balance between rescue and risk shifts the way a deck tilts under a man's boots. Shrapnel sweeps open spaces that were crowded with men minutes before. What had been a fight slowly getting under control becomes a scene people will remember by the names of friends they can't answer for. The sea is full of survivors who a moment earlier were rescuers. A destroyer backs bells with everything she has and lives because of a helmsman's reflex. There is no triumph in any of this, only the knowledge that victory can cost you on a day you thought belonged entirely to your side. News of Princeton's crisis rolls down the radios like a change in the weather you pretend you don't feel. On the big decks, the crews keep moving because the worst thing you can do in a storm is stop. The ordnance teams work quieter. Pilots who knew men on that ship fold the feeling into ritual. Safety off, flaps set, a glance at the fuel gauge, a touch to a good luck charm as if to a switch. In ready rooms, someone says nothing for a full minute, then clears his throat and goes through the run-in again, the difference between release too high and release too low. On the island, the air boss keeps a lid on his voice and the pattern keeps turning. If the enemy is slowing in the Sibuyan, that is an invitation, not a reprieve. Out west, the turnaway that looked like retreat proves to be a pause with teeth. Kurita comes back onto a heading for San Bernardino, the kind of course change that feels from far away, like a trick or a dare. Maybe he needed to reorder his column under air pressure. Maybe he wanted the rain squall to pass. Maybe he simply refused to go back across a sea he'd already crossed once. What matters to the Americans is not why, but that he is again angling for the strait. The earlier reports, the ones that made it sound like a broken force headed home, now sit in people's heads like a memory that no longer matches the view out the window. The misreading does more than bend a briefing. It induces a tilt in the entire operational frame. If the center force could still push through by night, then what you took off the board at noon, you may face at dawn somewhere else. It is the kind of dissonance that makes an admiral stare longer than usual at the northern horizon, while his air groups grind on with the job at hand. The pilots don't have time to wrestle with grand pictures. They have the simpler arithmetic of deck cycles and fuel flow, of holding a dive angle inside a box of exploding air. They climb, form, and flow west again, a machine the ocean can't ignore. On Musashi, the pauses between raids are long enough to inventory what pain has already bought. The list is being managed, but it wants to creep back if you look away. Pumps have a rhythm until they don't. Men rotate off stations because exhaustion makes mistakes. Steering answers, then quarrels with the rudder, then returns like a stubborn animal brought to heel by a man who knows how to talk to it. You can sense the crew learning their ship's new personality hour by hour. The counter-flooding that steadied the deck earlier now taxes every meter the screws can give. Speed is a number the bridge asks for and accepts, with a face that knows the truth behind it. Back on the American side, the next launches begin to feel like the day's heartbeat. The carriers come around, bows cutting the swell, and the deck crews point men into wind that has stiffened just enough to help. If fatigue had a sound, It would be the quiet after chocks are pulled and before throttle is opened, a space where everyone knows how much more is left to do. Ahead, the haze hangs lower, the smoke columns are a darker gray, and the sea holds the marks of a fight that isn't finished. The giant is still moving, but the drag of water and damage is doing work the pilots can see from miles out. And that knowledge pulls them in like gravity. By mid-afternoon, the day takes on that coppery light that makes distance hard to judge, and smoke look thicker than it is. The sea has a short, impatient chop, and the haze builds in plates that peel away as the sun leans west. The next strike packages find the column not as a spear, but as a stagger, ships adjusting in jerks, destroyers nosing out smoke, the big silhouettes shouldering into turns that look brave until you see how slowly they unwind. Musashi is easier to pick out now, not because of size alone, but because she carries a posture the sky recognizes. Down a few feet at the bow, a faint but undeniable lean that ruins the geometry of her own guns and makes every correction cost speed. The first of the afternoon, Helldivers arrive high and angry, rolling into dives that feel steeper because the flak has learned the cadence of the earlier runs and is waiting at the places men naturally aim. Bombs step across the deck in heavy blows, the misses almost as helpful as the hits as they ring steel and push water into openings no one drew on a plan. Avengers come in from both beams, more confident about the lanes now, releasing in pairs that stitch parallel wakes toward the armor belt. One torpedo shears under and detonates in a tight white wall that slams the hull. Another goes wide, but it forces a turn that only exposes the far side to a spread already inbound. The big ship answers with the old instinct, counter-flood the high side, and for a few minutes the bubble in the level steadies where the bridge wants it. Then the price is presented at the screws, more drag, less answer when the helmsman asks for bite. On board, damage control has become a language of lists and minutes. The reports stack, flooding in compartments that weren't on the morning's worry sheet, a pump taking suction and then losing it, men coughing in the heat below decks where air tastes like metal. The list creeps from single digits into the low teens and brings with it small humiliations that feel like warnings. A coffee cup sliding on a table, a toolbox that wants to walk. Gun crews brace differently without meaning to. On the starboard side, sailors look out and realize the sea is closer than it was at noon. The commander weighs another round of counter-flooding and takes it, knowing that every ton of water that steadies the deck also nails the ship's boots to the ocean. To the east, the carriers keep bending into the wind, their crews working with the calm of men who know that routine is how you make luck. The late-day packages push out again with an economy of words. Escorts on, searchlight beams nowhere, the target blot growing in the murk like a storm you aim for. In the run-in, a pilot notes the color of the smoke. It's darker now, oil thickening the plume, and adjusts his release a heartbeat later to account for crosswind that wasn't there earlier. He holds until the deck fills his world, drops, and hauls away under the tracers that reach up like thrown ropes. The next few torpedo impacts don't simply damage, they rearrange possibility. A port-side hit slams the hull, and the list jumps by a handful of degrees you can feel underfoot. A starboard answer makes up some of it, but not all, and the ship settles into a lean that redraws the horizon in every porthole. Steering begins to sulk, answering, then lagging, then answering again like a conversation with someone half a room away in heavy rain. The screws keep turning, but the knot meter reports a truth the bridge cannot sweeten. Whatever number they want, the sea will not give it. Men on the forecastle feel the bows shoulder into waves that slap higher than they did an hour ago. And at the break of the superstructure, you can see water cruising where only air ought to be. Time goes strange in a fight like this. Late afternoon becomes early evening without anyone on a clock saying so. The light goes sideways. The smoke takes on the color of burnt copper. Another strike leans in, later than anyone wanted, and earlier than anyone is willing to admit. Bombs rock the superstructure, and the bridge shudders when a near miss hammers water up and over like a thrown curtain. Below, some compartments are simply given up, dogged and left to the sea, so the living parts of the ship can be kept alive a little longer. A petty officer calls out the list angle, and the number feels personal, as if it were about his own balance, not the ship's. There is a point where the human mind understands before the log does. Men start moving gear to the high side without orders, Hoses and lines are shifted because no one wants them to slide and tangle when the tilt increases. Voices pitch up a half tone. On the bridge, the decision that no captain wants to make begins to take shape not as a single word, but as the end of a sequence that has been running all day. The list swells into the high teens, then past 20. The deck angle turns ladders into cliffs and passageways into chutes. Water comes aboard where it never has before. The ship is not fighting the enemy now, as much as the arithmetic of her own wounded buoyancy. The abandoned ship order, when it comes, walks the length of the vessel faster than any man can. It is a sound more felt than heard, because the steel is loud, and the sea is louder, and the heart has its own drum. Men take to the high side, to the rails, to the points where boats might swing if boats are still there to swing. Some climb down lines into water that shines like obsidian with oil. Some jump. They hit a sea that is both friend and thief, buoyant enough to take your weight, cold enough to teach haste a lesson, slick enough to steal grip from your hands. The ship's great mass holds its dignity even now, rolling a little more, then in a single terrible sweep that empties decks and parachutes loose gear into the air. The bow heaves, the stern lifts, and what was a city of steel becomes a shape the ocean can finally swallow. Escorts circle with engines straining, their bows breaking through the long slick that already stretches downwind. Search crews lean into the dark with boat hooks and fabric slings, pulling men up who look like they were painted black. The air smells like fuel and hot iron. Some sailors come aboard quiet, eyes too bright. Others arrive talking too fast about small things. Who was where? A joke in the mess that morning. As if restitching the day could hold it together for a little longer. The destroyers make their choices quickly. The sun slides toward the horizon, and the silhouettes of the remaining heavy ships are already turning east, already thinking about a strait and the night beyond it. From the air, the sinking is not a clean moment, but a series of meanings. A pilot circling on fumes sees the angle change and knows. Another, climbing into cloud, catches one last glimpse of a wake that used to be straight and is now a smear. Farther out, men on carrier decks hear the radio reports and say nothing for a beat, because the scale of it resists words. The sea that morning promised a duel and delivered an unraveling. The giant is gone, and the hole she leaves in the enemy column is larger than any line on a chart can show. The day gives way to dusk, the sky bruised and low, and all along the American decks men turn to the work of resetting for what the night and the next morning might still demand. Night comes on while the sea is still deciding what to do with the damage. In the wake of the giant's disappearance, the center force carries on, a little slower, a little less certain, a little more aware of how much the sky can take from a plan that was designed for guns. The surviving battleships still have their teeth. The heavy cruisers still throw big wakes when ordered to. But the day has carved away pieces that don't show on a silhouette. Compartments sealed and left to the sea change how a ship breathes. Pumps that ran hot all afternoon don't cool simply because the sun went down. Ammunition expended to fight off attack waves is ammunition not available tomorrow. Fuel burn climbs when counter-flooding adds weight the engines never meant to carry. The column that heads for San Bernardino has distance to cover and less of itself to do it with. On charts far to the east, the pencil lines have their own momentum. The midday turnaway was read as a retreat, a picture supported by honest reports sent in good faith from men who saw what they saw. The bait to the north waves its flag, and the instinct to cut the head off enemy Airpower is not irrational, not in a war where a handful of carriers can redraw an ocean in an afternoon. Orders are written with verbs that feel decisive. Messages that sound like contingencies are heard as commitments. The split between what some people think a covering force is and what others think it will be becomes, hour by hour, an absence at a very specific strait. No one chooses chaos. It arrives as the sum of decisions that made sense when they were made. Through the night, the center force crosses the black seam of San Bernardino, under a sky that has forgotten the day's smoke. The water there is that peculiar midnight color that swallows light and returns only movement. Lookouts count shapes that slide through the dark, then lose them, then find them again where the mind expects them to be. The crews are worn down by the rhythm of alarms. The damage control parties know their routes by touch. There is a difference between tired and spent. Too many men feel the second word. Engines work against both the sea and the day's inheritance. the hundreds of tons of water carried as necessity, the friction of plates slightly sprung, the welded patches that creak a little in the turns. The center force clears the passage, but not in the posture it imagined in planning rooms months earlier. Dawn writes its first thin line in the east and finds a different kind of American ship, where the landing fleet expected cover, small decks with big hearts, aircraft that launch on short runs and carry ordnance chosen for support, not for dueling with battleships. The surprise is mutual and brutal. From the west, heavy shells come on with the indifference of physics. From the east, a handful of escort carriers throws everything with wings into the air and makes a storm out of pilots who know their torpedoes don't like armor and their bombs won't break a deck, but also know that a hit near the waterline is a kind of truth the sea understands. Destroyers write their names into history with smoke and torpedo wakes that look like chalk lines on a classroom floor. The center force hurls itself forward and then slowly, subtly begins to unravel under a pressure not measured only in calibers. Confusion flows faster than orders. The air grows thick with near misses that are, in their sum, a kind of hit. That morning's chaos is shaped by the previous day in ways that don't fit neatly into after-action narratives. Ships that expended ammunition in the Sibuyan have to do math under fire. A few knots of speed surrendered to flooding control become minutes lost in closing or escaping. The heaviest ship that might have anchored a line is gone, and the confidence that comes with having a mountain at your center is gone with it. Damage that was manageable on paper is less manageable when every maneuver costs time, and every time cost invites another attack. The decision to withdraw at Samar is made by men who know they can still kill, but are less certain they can carry the day's death across the afternoon and home again. The logic of survival shows up dressed as prudence. Later, people will argue about numbers. How many torpedoes took the giant apart? How many bombs found metal rather than sea? Credible ranges tell the story better than any single tally. Well over a dozen torpedo strikes by day's end, a count of heavy bomb hits in the low to middle teens, and enough near misses to batter seams and exhaust a crew's ability to keep the ship dry. The exact digits wander between sources because the ocean erases chalk fast, and men in cockpits see only what their frames allow. The operational truth survives the variance. Repeated coordinated strikes forced counter-flooding, stole speed, damaged steering, and pushed a capital ship past the point where engineering could keep up with physics. People will argue, too, about the choice to charge north. In the frame of the afternoon, it reads as consistent. Destroy the enemy's carriers, protect the beachhead from what had always been the decisive threat. The misleading turnaway, the radio picture that emphasized one danger while blurring another, the assumptions about who would guard which strait, those are human factors, not moral failures. They converge on a gap into which one fleet disappears while another appears. If the outcome feels unsatisfying, it's because we prefer villains to be singular and wrong, when in fact a day like this one is made of many reasonable decisions colliding at speed. Stand back from both arguments and a broader lesson becomes visible in the glare. Airpower's patient arithmetic triumphs over the dream of a single decisive gunnery encounter. The sky did not knock down the giant with one blow. It took the ship apart by making her choose between bad options and then punishing both choices. It stole movement, then stole control, then stole the crew's ability to keep water in the right places. It made a fleet designed for the clean geometry of battle lines fight a dirty, three-dimensional fight where time and fatigue were weapons. The sea remembers which logic wins. By the time the day after Sibuyan is over, the invasion beaches are still held by men who never saw a battleship up close. The center force has spent blood and certainty it can't replace. And the northern bait has served its purpose without changing the war's direction. The ocean around the Philippines is full of survivors with stories that will not fit in any one account. The ships that limp home will carry quiet lessons in their scars. The ones that don't return will leave holes in rosters and in memory. The scorecard will be argued over for years. The shape of the outcome will not. The content of this video is compiled from multiple sources. If anything is inaccurate or needs correction, please comment below. Thank you, and see you next time.